Washington, D.C.'s historic Mount Pleasant neighborhood is home to dozens of nearly identical aging row houses, but you can't miss this one. With paintings and sculptures out front and a buzzing garden in the back, the Lamont Street Collective has been an affordable home for struggling artists and activists since 1974.
It's actually the first socialist hub of DC.
There have been times in our past where it's been more of an art collective, more of a political kind of activist place.
The constant has always been the community portion of it, that we want to be seen in the neighborhood of Mount Pleasant as this community space.
In 2001, the owner of the house died and left the house in a trust. The bank that managed the trust put the house up for sale.
In 2002, there was a bid made on the house, and that's really when the legal situation started unraveling.
More than a decade later, the residents of the collective are still living in the house, still trying to save it.
We are still in a case, an ejectment case is being brought against us by the people who wanted to buy the house.
We have about 3 years to find a way to purchase the house.
You know, this is a place worth fighting for, so we're doing that.
The Lamont Street Collective was founded by John Aker, a leading member of the DC Statehood Party.
And he was this big, tall, funny, blustery socialist guy.
The collective became one of the first of the city's many experiments in non-traditional communal living.
Because of the history of DC and the fact that DC wasn't very popular, 20, 30 years ago, housing was cheap, and so a lot of people moved in and started group houses and cheap housing.
Old recruitment ads for new members emphasized the collective's radical roots. The house still attracts progressive folks, but it complements its political activities with community events, like its biannual Salon de Libertad, a showcase for local artists and musicians. This is no ordinary group house. On any given night, the residents might host a tap dance class in the dining room, a conversation with an anti-poverty activist, or a screening of LGBT cinema in the backyard, all open to the public. Moshana moved into the house about a year ago.
My first impression was definitely hippie. You're not just looking for housing, you're looking for a community. And in this house, you have a support network, whether you choose to use it or not. I've been in DC for 4.5 years, and ever since I started living here, this house really made DC for me feel like home.
Omo is the house's newest member. She just arrived last month.
After I moved in, I think people were very hospitable. They all came and knocked on my door, and everyone's like, "Hey, welcome to the house. How are you? Glad to have you here." Kind of the idea, the old school idea of like bringing a pie to your neighbor, you know?
Cooking duties are shared, and most meals eaten family style. Holing up in a bedroom watching TV is frowned upon. Members are expected to be active, present, and social when they're in the house. One of the most important elements of the collective's structure is a monthly house meeting, mandatory for all 7 residents.
Since I've been here, we've definitely had some conflicts. I mean, it could be small stuff like, "Hey dude, you're leaving your dishes." So house meetings are definitely for those resolutions. And to get ready for the next month, chores, cooking, legal situation, checking in on that, what community events we're planning.
At the next meeting, the more seasoned residents will bring Omo up to speed on the little conventions and practices that keep a house of 7 people running smoothly.
There are lots of like labels on things. We have like a calendar that has who does meals on it, and
Whenever there's like a major turnover, like there is a long kind of curve to people figuring it out. And, we have a house meeting tomorrow, and we have a lot of important stuff to talk about.
With 7 people in the house, a new member, a subletter, and 1 resident phoning in from New York, making any kind of decision involves lots of discussion. The meeting goes on for more than 2 hours, covering big topics like the legal battle, and small ones like labeling food and composting.
It's just or like a lemon that's like rotting in the drawer. Like,
yeah, when I
no
moved
one
in, I found so many rotting things.
But like that's like a daily thing. Like just throw it out. There's no reason to.
Yeah, and don't compost that stuff. We don't want the rotten stuff.
Oh, I didn't know that. My bad. Well, I guess the major thing too is not necessarily for me just having a vegetarian option, but having something that's like substantive as a vegetarian option.
I think there may be a difference between what you think is substantive and what other people think is.
That's
you know
what
I
I think.
I think you consume a lot more protein than I do,
Yeah.
you know?
Rent at the Lamont Street Collective, which also includes utilities and food, is only $550 to $650 per month per person, well below DC market rate.
Because of the legal situation, the rent has stayed as a constant for the last 10 years.
None of the current members of the collective were around in 2001 when the landlord died and the house got put up for sale. Seth is the longest-serving current member. He moved into the house in 2003.
I remember there was legal stuff that happened before I moved in. And when I moved in, it was not explained to me very clearly. And I went for a couple of years without really understanding it. I knew that the house had a lawyer, and I knew that they were like fighting to try to allow us to stay in the house.
The tenants definitely were holding rallies and trying to make it known that they would not just stand by and let this house basically get sold.
Jeffrey Logan and Lena Bond made a bid on the house in 2002. Bond is a violin professor at the University of Colorado, and Logan works in renewable energy. Logan and Bond, who did not respond to repeated requests for comment, have bought, flipped, and resold 2 other houses within a block of the Lamont Street Collective, and they are the current owners of a 3rd house on the block.
They say they're going to move into the house, you know, but according to DC law, if they're just buying the house to flip it, they can't do that. We have to remain tenants.
Mount Pleasant is a popular neighborhood, but you know, I've lived here long enough in different neighborhoods to see that popularity sometimes ruins a neighborhood because everyone wants to live there and everyone starts to raise the rent because it's so popular, and then it becomes too expensive, you know.
Putting together and executing a plan of action isn't easy in a group as transient as the Lamont Street Collective. In the course of just one recent year, for example, 5 of the 7 housemates moved out or subletted their rooms, making way for new members who had to be brought on board with the mission and legal strategy.
You've had so many people living here, like the turnaround is crazy. So what do you do when you're faced with the burden of a legal situation that happened way before your time, but you're still kind of paying off for it? I think it's just a really big burden to bear.
The collective is nearing an agreement with Logan and Bond, which would give the collective's residents the right to bid on the house. But the question of how to raise the money to purchase it still looms large, especially since the price of the house has continued to rise in the decades since Bond and Logan made their bid.
Housing prices in Mount Pleasant, like lots of places in DC, are, you know, approaching or over $1 million a house. I can't afford to buy my house anymore, and a lot of other people can't afford it.
We'd like to be able to maintain this place as like a permanent, affordable housing.
The plans are to either have this be some sort of a community-owned trust, so we can continue this cooperative, collective living style, but then the community of Mount Pleasant, for example, pays into it. But ideally, we'd want some sort of an angel investor coming and recognizing the importance of both this type of community / affordable housing in DC being important, and then wanting to support us.
In order to prove their worth to the community, the members of the collective are planning to ramp up their agenda of events open to the public.
We want this space to be a place where our passions can flourish, but at the same time, the community can feel also some sort of collective ownership. That if, I don't know, they want to get a speaker together, they know that this space is available.
OMO already has some ideas about fundraising, hosting weekly or monthly workshops on things like figure drawing, sewing, and cupcake decorating, taught by friends of the house residents.
I understand that the house has like a really big following and that like lots of people show up for like the big parties and events that they do. So I think some of that audience will come to this. That small core audience I think is important for fundraising. It's one of the major things that someone will ask if you like write a grant application. It's like, how many people do you serve a year or a month or whatever? Like, what is your reach as an organization? There's a lot of money in DC for art stuff, for providing art programs in community. You just have to have like documentation and legitimacy and a following.
Raising close to $1 million would be a daunting task for anyone, but the difficulty is compounded for the collective, which has no leadership hierarchy, no one in charge, and no one to make sure things get done.
I think you can say that across the board about this house, is we're probably not as organized as we should be.
On Halloween night, the residents of the Lamont Street Collective decked their house out like they do every year and spent the evening performing for kids, meeting some new neighbors, and greeting familiar faces. In light of the collective's legal issues, visibility in the community has taken on new importance as the residents seek support from those who appreciate what they bring to Mount Pleasant.
In terms of what they do for the community and just to provide the diversity and provide, a place for, young people to live, I'm okay with group houses. I would like to see the city institutionalize them, to sort of look at group housing as another good, viable part of urban life.
Even with the fate of the collective and her house hanging in the balance, Mashana's looking for the upside to the inevitable challenge ahead.
Taking this legal situation, flipping it on its head and saying, whoa, we have an opportunity in 3 years to turn this house into something amazing. And maybe, lighting a fire under our butts is exactly what was needed to get this house going. Yeah.